Well, good morning, everyone. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Uh, well, it's a time to go within and to reflect and to find this peace that in these days might be a rare commodity. This is where sometimes when we're confronted with, world situations or family crises and troubles, this inner work is all that we can lean on, and so it's our daily bread, as it says in the Lord's Prayer, that strengthens us, that gives us this ability to endure and to even triumph over these obstacles and difficulties, and actually begin to see that these too are the opportunities and even food that we need to cultivate these parts of ourself that have been long denied or unconscious, that have been hidden from us, or something that we've been resistant to look at. And so these, flare-ups, these difficulties, these breakdowns that we encounter in life are oftentimes that nudge, if not that kick in the pants, that gets us moving on the inner road towards self-discovery. And so you often hear this phrase, I'm spiritual, not religious. So we're going to be talking about that today in some ways, and drawing out the distinctions of what possibly could be meant by that I'm spiritual and not religious. I think we all have sort of an idea of what that can mean. But it also comes back to what we were just saying, and that is when we're confronted with the challenges and the darknesses of life, sometimes the man-made belief systems are not enough to pull us through. We need something real, something valid, something experiential. And I think that's the distinction that I would draw between religious and spiritual. That there is something on the inside that lights up, that wakes up, that we begin to feel it, that we begin to know it beyond a shadow of a doubt. That there's something greater than the ego, more than this world. A love that can't die, and a love in the end that will always win. And so when we are confronted, we are also encouraged to find this rare jewel, this pearl of great price, which is the spiritual experience. And when we do begin to discover it, we also realize that this was the very self that we are. And that's the beauty of it. It's been coming up a lot in our weekly classes, this phrase of Muhammad, where he says, when you discover yourself, you'll discover your Lord. And it's because the two are in the same place or in the same state. They are of the same light. They are of the same being. And so this spiritual path is really a path of not only self-discovery, but the discovery of the Creator's light and love that lights every moment that we are in. So when we begin to see this and become more attuned to the relationship that we have with this deeper self, we begin to take our eyes off of focusing on the world and the appearances and the dramas, and we begin to not only look for our guidance and our safety and our peace within, but also the power and the wisdom that we can then use to shine light within these difficult situations that will oftentimes transform, because we've gone through the transformation. And so then we can bring it without trying, without forcing, without controlling. Just our very presence begins to transmute and transform what was once maybe a very dysfunctional dynamic or a very challenging or traumatic experience. We somehow find the resources within. And that is also another key element of the spiritual versus the religious path. So the religious path will often throw your attention outside of you towards a book or a person or a God that is somehow out there and not you, whereas the spiritual experience is saying that it's all within. And we've had these revolutions within human history, within even our religious traditions, where each of our sacred traditions have gone through or still maintain this hidden understanding. And Unity Church is another outgrowth of that. where it in many ways broke with the traditional Christian views, and it began to not only focus on the healing that can be found within and the power of thought, which are these internal energies that we are constantly generating for good or ill in our life, but it also recognizes this notion of inclusion and total equality in everyone. And that's a huge distinction between the spiritual and the religious path, I think. That this idea of inclusion, where everyone is invited, everyone is equal, everyone is divine, is oftentimes missed within our religious traditions. Oftentimes you have an ethnic superiority or a belief that is the saved and the damned. You have, even within like the Indian caste system for many centuries, and really still to this day for those traditionalists that hold to it, if you're not in the first two higher castes, you're not really allowed to know the sacred teachings. Just a bit of history here, so that you have four castes in the Hindu tradition, right? So you have the intellectual priestly caste, or the Brahmanas. You have the warrior administrative class, the military class, which are the Kshatriyas. Then you have the merchant class, the farmers, the businessmen and women, the Vaishyas. And then you have the labor class, right? The menial workers, the blue collar force, and that's the Sudras. And the stories go that if you were a Sudra, a lower class individual, and you even heard the Vedas being chanted by a Brahmana, the sacred teachings. Again, I don't know if this is true or hyperbole, but molten lead would be poured into your ears just from hearing the sacred chant. You're not allowed. If you were caught muttering or speaking the sacred Vedas or mantras, your tongue would be cut out. Again, this very harsh distinction that's drawn between in-groups and out-groups within a religious mentality. And so what spirituality, again, is doing is it's bypassing or overlooking or transcending these false dichotomies and false lines of separation, and recognizing at the heart of all life is the one self. And we get that in many traditions within ancient India. It's again the distinction between the spiritually realized and the religiously dogmatic. And so we're going to be looking at some of the Sufi teachings today, from Hafiz specifically, and the teachings of Dr. Hawkins. And so, as you know, the Sufis are really about awakening the heart, right? So in Sufism, there's this depth psychology that's quite beautiful and quite profound, where they recognize different levels of the ego and how it operates. And as the spiritual practice becomes more and more refined, the ego attenuates or lessens, it becomes more and more dissolved. And then you enter, say the Sufis, into the kalb, into this inner garden of the heart. And it's where yourself and your Lord meet, right? And so Hafiz is coming from this tradition, even though it's within the Islamic world. There is this beautiful, intimate, non-dual Sufi path. Again, echoing what we were just talking about in the Vedic tradition of India, you had an individual in the Sufi tradition called Al-Hallaj. And Al-Hallaj was a mystic that entered into the secret place within the heart, and he realized that his self and his Lord are one. And so he would go around, maybe not in the wisest way, but he would go around and announce that he was reality. Ana al-Haq, I am reality. And, the religious folk could not bear this belief system, because it's blasphemy to say that you share the same divine name as Allah, as God. You can't. You're a mere mortal. And so Hallaj was tortured brutally and hung. And so, beware. Jesus says, don't cast your pearls before swine, or they may trample the pearls in mud and turn around and rend you like wild boar. They'll rip you apart. So the pearls are these esoteric realizations. Know your audience, right? And so you're not going to cast your pearls before swine. You're not going to share the deepest, intimate secrets of your spiritual realization with someone that's not really prepared or equipped or even desirous to hear it, because it can backfire royally, as it did for Halaj. Okay, so let's get into some of these poems from Hafiz. This one is called, I Have Learned So Much. I have learned so much from God that I can no longer call myself a Christian, a Hindu, a Muslim, a Buddhist, a Jew. The truth has shared so much of itself with me that I can no longer call myself a man, a woman, an angel, or even pure soul. Love has befriended Hafiz so completely, it has turned to ash and freed me of every concept and image my mind has ever known. So another important distinction between religious and spiritual is, in order to have this spiritual experience, we have to go beyond what we think and what we believe. At best, beliefs are a way of directing our attention inward to these hidden forces and potentials within our consciousness. And in many ways, these teachings, especially when we're getting these non-dual transmissions from masters and avatars and spiritual realized gurus and guides, they carry that punch, that force, that current, that when the mind is ripe and ready, it can actually carry you in, right? And bring you to that place where you can then open that door, so to speak, and enter that vibration, that frequency, that state. And once you're there, you're no longer worried about the words. You're not worried about the labels of Christian or Jew or Buddhist. It's kind of like, if you've never, again, to use maybe a lower chakra example, but it's often used. If you've never had sex before and you've read all of these books and you've looked at pictures and diagrams and getting all of these examples and explanations of sex, you have all of this knowledge of what it might be like. But once you have the intimate experience, those words, those diagrams, everything just goes out the window. And so this is really what it's called in these sacred teachings. It's often called the bridal chamber. Right? Even in Christianity, this is where we get the concept. And in mystical Christianity, it's the bridal chamber. It's where your soul and God's light merge in divine union, right? In sacred sexuality, if you will, where the bride and the bridegroom, the soul and God, become one. And so this joining, this ecstasy, this orgasmic experience cannot be contained within words. At best, words direct you there. But once you begin to taste it, like Hafiz was saying, every concept gets burnt up. Every thought becomes just a dim reflection at best of what this experience gives you. And so this is another reason what we were talking about earlier, as we go through these seasons of trial and tribulation. And as the world picture seems to get darker and more severe, a lot of people are feeling the inner earthquakes and upsets that are sometimes overwhelming, and we're white-knuckling our life. We are actually needing that ecstatic experience. We're needing this union with God, that nothing will actually suffice when we enter the dark night of the soul. And I think some of us are experiencing this individually, and a little forecast here. I think a lot of us are going to experience it collectively a little down the road. Things are not pointing in an upward turn, it seems, in our culture and society. And so it's going to give us a lot of tribulation, but it's also going to hopefully pull us towards what really matters most. And that is finding the truth within, finding this experience and joy within. We've heard the words, and oftentimes they become very stale, and they don't really carry that experience. And what's really preventing us from going in is our willingness, right? We still feel like there's something out there to pull us towards enjoyment of things in the world. And as that picture begins to really shift and wane, it's going to really wake us up to realize there's really nothing out there. As Jesus says in A Course in Miracles, the world is a desert. And once you realize that the world is a desert, it has no substance, no real enjoyment, no life. Once you realize that, then the only thing to do once you realize you're in a desert is leave. And the way to leave is you turn inward and find the oasis within the garden of the heart. That experience is really what the desert of the world needs. And for many of us, that's what we've come here for. We've come here not only to wake up and discover it, but also to be a transmitter or a servant of it, right? To bring it to others. This one's called The Great Religions. The great religions are the ships, poets, the lifeboats. Every sane person I know has jumped overboard. That is good business. That is good for business, isn't it, Hafiz? So, Hafiz being one of the poets or enlightened bards, right? The mystical poet, a Sufi. Everybody who's fleeing the boats of organized religion is looking for the juice, looking for the life of God in the experience. And so, the lifeboats are where the poets are waiting to pick up those that are jumping ship. And so this is where you'll find that the truth can be known, but you have to leave where you think you are, whether it's a religion or just a paradigm or a worldview that you're so used to operating in, right? We get so habitualized to our own creed and dogma of life. These are my beliefs. This is what I think. This is what's true. And it becomes so concretized and solid and real. And there's pain in the mind. And what these teachings are always pointing out is whenever you're feeling pain or guilt or distress in the mind, it has nothing to do with what's going on out there or what other people are saying or not saying or doing or not doing. The pain and the stress and the guilt and the anxiety is because I'm holding tightly to beliefs that aren't true, that aren't in alignment with my real self. And so I'm going to feel disharmony, dis-ease, disquiet, and distortion from such beliefs. So the only real rational, sane choice would be to jump ship. You would have to jump ship from your own mind. You have to jump ship from your worldview, because your worldview is giving you a position of perception that's blocking you from the orgasmic, ecstatic experience of your own deepest nature, right? So it's good business for Hafiz and his ilk, because they're waiting for those who are ready, that are tired of being insane, tired of the same old rituals that are not only destroying our life and our inspiration, but are wreaking havoc on our inner peace. And so along these lines, our last poem in this book. Stop being so religious. What do sad people have in common? It seems they have all built a shrine to the past and often go there and do strange wail and worship. What is the beginning of happiness? It is to stop being so religious like that. It's exactly what we were just saying. That being religious means holding to our past belief system. This is the way I am. This is the way they are. There's no other way to be. This is what's true. This is the fact. And it's all based on a past that cannot change. And so we hold to these things as if we know. And the truth of the matter is, we don't know. There's a lesson in A Course in Miracles where it says, I don't know what anything is for. Another lesson says, all of these thoughts that I'm having are meaningless. When I could admit that to myself, I can then put my feet firmly on the path to awakening, because the only one I'm waiting for to have this ecstasy and joy come into my awareness is me. And the only thing that's stopping me is me. And the way that I stop myself is I hold to the past. So this is the opportunity that what we once relied upon, this is what we often find, what we once relied upon or what we once always hoped for or dreamed of, either breaks or never comes, or comes in a way that never gives us the joy and the happiness that we thought it would. And so what we've once lived for and hoped for based within this past agenda is now in the dust. And that's where the sadness comes. And that was Hafiz's opening point. What do sad people have in common? They're all living in the past. They're ghosts. They're haunting the past. And right here in the present moment is the blessing. Rumi says that, you're walking in the waters of blessing and your robes are soaked with it, but you're far off in a dreamland and you don't even know you're standing in your own blessings. And so what happens then is the mind comes out of the swoon. It's like it's been hallucinating, it's been tripping, it's drunk. These are all ways of describing it. And you sober up and you realize, oh my God, I've been doing this to myself, and I've been like in a dream state, a trance, walking around, just thinking I know what everything is for, and it's all bullshit. And so that's another blessing when things start to crumble, because then you can see that it wasn't worth investing in. It wasn't real. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing real crumbles. Right? A little more from Hafiz. Every holy book, a candle giving advice to the sun, can make the sun smile because of the flame's remarkable innocence. Maybe I should be careful about saying something like this, but every holy book lifts the corners of my mouth and even makes me giggle. So what do you think he's saying there? That every holy book has these conflicting views mixed together, ego and spirit, the realized and the unrealized, right? And so once you've realized, once the mind has been lit by the central sun, these little candles don't cast as much light. Right? And Krishna says this in the Gita. He says, once you've realized the self of being, then what you find is that the sacred books contain as much water as a puddle, and you're in the ocean. And so this is what Hafiz is saying, is that when he hears the teachings of the holy books, his awakened awareness is able to sift and sort out the real from the unreal, and he can see the convolution within the sacred books. And finally here, in a holy book I have. In a holy book there are pages from the Bible and the Quran, and pages from the sutras and from the Upanishads, the Torah and the Gita, and pages of things that unknown saints wrote in collaboration with the heavens that people have never seen, and pages of the wisdom of animals and their young singing while they played, the way we once did with the stars, and pages of plants and pages of sounds and pages of earths. Yes, it is all there in my soul. Anything ink has ever preserved, anything that stone ever begged to have carved on it, anything any instrument gifted from its mind or a brush left for us to see, any space sanctified by dance, I know. And anything that will ever be written in your heart, you, the eyes or ears and cells that now hear this. In a holy book I have, in a sacred text I carry, is the face of everyone who will ever be. So we talked about this in the Tuesday night class on Buddhist mindfulness, that in these mindfulness practices of simply following the breath and quieting the mind, when the mind becomes very still and quiet, it can enter deeper and deeper states of concentration. Right? And as it becomes increasingly concentrated, it also becomes naturally insightful. And what begins to take place is you begin to look at what's in the library of energy and information of your own being. Your mind-body complex has all of the energy and information of the entire universe. And it's when the mind becomes quiet that it can realize that everything that ever lived is living now and will live is contained within you, as Hafiz is saying, that you're the holy book. Right? It's a very different way of thinking of the self than the ego view of things. Right? Rather than being impoverished, Jesus says in A Course in Miracles, you are and have everything. That's your self-nature. You are and have everything. Now watch the mind. Of course that's not true. That's bullshit. Who can believe that? How do you even get your mind to watch the mind? This is the beginning stages of this journey. You have to realize there's a part of the mind that is your enemy to awakening. It doesn't want to awaken. It wants to haunt the past. It wants to stay in the familiar. It wants to stay in the toxicity and the dysfunction. It has become accustomed to it. In many ways, the light hurts the eyes, especially when we're hiding, when we have shame, when we have guilt. The light hurts. But we begin to realize that this becomes the motivation for healing. Yeah? So continuing with this idea of the difference between the spiritual and the religious, David Hawkins has some nice things to share with us. So what really begins this jumping ship, as we talked about, from the religious to the spiritual is the desire to wake up, this desire to heal, this desire to end our suffering, right? This is usually the motivation. We don't want pain. We want to feel joy. And so we are desirous of that. And if the pain is intense and the sadness or the anxiety is intense, so too the desire to wake up will become intense. And it has to be intense. You know, it says in the gospel that broad is the way and many are on that road that leads to death. But narrow is the way and few find it that leads to life. And the idea is that the desire to wake up has to be stronger than the desire to stay asleep. And that takes tremendous courage and resolve and perseverance and persistence, because we're going to confront these old patterns within ourselves, our past. And it's going to try to take us off the mark again and again and again, relentlessly. And so we have to be firm in our commitment to wake up. Otherwise, we will drift. We will leave the teachings. And so this is how you'll know your character and what you really want. As it says in Zen, if you're being held underwater, you want air above all else. And if you're being held under your sadness and suffering, you're going to want enlightenment above all else. Right? We come to that firm resolve eventually, whether in this life or at some other point. So he says here, traditionally the pathways to God have been through the heart, with love and devotion, selfless service, surrender, worship, and adoration. Or other pathways show up with the mind as the lead, where you have the teachings of non-duality. So devotion or insight meditation or self-inquiry. Each way may seem more comfortable at one stage or another, or they may alternate in emphasis. So maybe you found this in your own journey. There are some practices or seasons within your life where you're really lit and drawn by this desire to feel the love and peace and compassion of God. And you're ready to surrender yourself in a loving service to God's light and truth. And then at other times, you're really in this place of really trying to get clear and discern what is going on with this higher function of the intellect, this self-inquiry. Who am I? Right? Who's the one listening? Who's the one asking the question? Who am I? Right? This inner discovery. Each way may seem more comfortable at one stage or another, or they may alternate. Either way, it is a hindrance to consider that there is a personal self or an I or an ego that is doing the striving or seeking or that will become enlightened. It is much easier to realize there's no such thing as the ego or an I identity that is doing any seeking, but instead it is an impersonal aspect of consciousness that is doing the exploring and the seeking. Right? So the story we have in our past of who we are, my life, my experience, my journey, this self that shows up in the present moment. Hawkins and 1,000 other enlightened teachers are saying that's the number one obstacle to you finding happiness. This I, right? It's what Hafiz was talking about in terms of what do sad people have in common? And another way of answering it is in light of this. What sad people have in common is they think they're a separate I. The separate I is literally made of the past. It's a ghost. It's a phantom. It doesn't exist in the here and the now. That's why in insight meditation and pure devotion, the I literally disappears and the mind comes back to the radiance of the present moment. And it realizes it was never the ego body identity. That's why there's ecstasy. Ecstasy literally means ekstasis in Greek, standing out from. So standing out from the I complex. Another yoga scholar years ago coined the term enstasis. So you can say you can stand outside of the I, or you can go so deep within that you enter that secret garden of the heart that the Sufis talk about, and you're beyond the reach of the I. You've entered the core of reality. And the I was some kind of a peripheral thought that doesn't abide here. And Rumi tells that beautiful story that illustrates this. So the lover is the separate I that's seeking to wake up and knocks on the door of the beloved. And from inside the house, without opening the door, the beloved or God says, "Who is it?" And the lover says, "It's me." And the voice from inside the house says, "Go away. I don't know who you are." And completely distressed because the lover is so in love with the beloved that lives in that house, he goes away and for a year is going through this deep inner work and transformation. And after a year of this, comes back and knocks on the door. And the voice inside says, "Who is it?" And the lover says, "It is you." The door opens. And the beloved says, "Now you can come in. There's not room enough in this house for two eyes." So this I that we think we are, that we carry around, is like a corpse that we drag behind us. It's our past. It's a construct. And it's also an agreement reality. Right? When we look at one another, we are always subtly reinforcing the existence of the I. That this is who I am, and I agree to give testament to you being that. And so we keep each other's secrets. We aid and abet each other's crime of killing joy from our hearts. And so this sadness that we all seem to share, we just call it by different names and have different reasons for it, is really always back to the fact that this sadness is because we're the separate I. And the spiritual path is looking directly at what makes this I seem real. And with insight and the light and grace of the divine, this I begins to dissolve in our awareness. We begin to have the courage and the willingness and the desire to actually live without it, to show up in this present moment as if we are newly born and have no past, and see each other and everything without a past. That's when we enter the garden of reality. That's really what's true. The mind becomes free from its own self-delusion and self-imprisonment that was rooted or tethered to this belief of the separate I. So for a moment, just consider the possibility of what would life be like if you really were freed from the I and its story. Who would you be without the I? This is enlightenment. And it's here now. We just get pulled back into the past, unconsciously. So there's no such thing as the ego or an I identity that is doing any seeking. but instead, it is an impersonal aspect of consciousness that is doing the exploring and seeking. So the I that has this story of being the body and being this person, if it thinks it's going to be enlightened, it's actually a very devious tactic in a sense, because that I can never be enlightened. Enlightenment literally is defined as the dissolving of the I. So how great then if we insist on being the I and then we go into these teachings. They will disappoint. They will never reach the itch that we think we have as the I. They're not going to give us what we're looking for, because what we're really looking for as the ego seeking enlightenment is to be an enlightened ego, to have all of our needs and desires met, to be a happy ego and live a happy dream. And that will never come. But what will remain is the reification or the reinforcement that you're the ego. But now you have another reason to be sad. You failed the project of enlightenment. God doesn't love you. God doesn't want to know you. God has locked you out of his house, told you to go away. What do? You get rid of your I. You don't weep and mope and complain as the I and never go back to his house. You get rid of your goddamn I. A useful approach is to let the love for God replace the willfulness that is driving the seeking. One can release all desire to seek and realize that the thought that is there is anything else but God. One can release all desire to seek and realize that the thought that there is anything else but God is a baseless vanity. That's how you sort out the real from the unreal in your mind. Any thought that presupposes that there's other existences or other causes or other beings or other states or other realities that are other than God is vanity, illusion. And that is just a conjuring within consciousness. That's the only place it's taking place. So this is a quick way of realizing how we weave a web of falsehood in our mind. And then the mind projects a world based on the falsehood, thinks it's living in an external world, but all it's living in is a reflection of its own misperceptions and false views coming back through the feedback system of the world. With reflection, it can be seen that both the body and the mind are the result of the innumerable conditions of the universe, and that one is at best the witness of this concordance. Out of an unrestricted love for God arises the willingness to surrender all motives except to serve God completely. To be the servant of God becomes one's goal rather than enlightenment. To be a perfect channel for God's love is to surrender completely and to eliminate the goal-seeking of the spiritual ego. Joy itself becomes the initiator for further spiritual work. So when we're ready to lay down all seeking, right, either outside of ourselves or even within, and let love pull us, right? That's when we come to the joy. From joy and humility, the rest of the process is certain. One becomes aware that the whole spiritual seeking process is being activated by the attraction of the ultimate destiny to realize your true self. So that's really where you're getting the impulse to want to know, to show up, to listen to the teachings, to have any kind of an attraction to the higher truth, The only reason why that's showing up on your dashboard of your mind is because you're that self. And these thoughts about the higher teachings and meditation and service and kindness and love, these are all traces that point or bring you to the higher self. He says something even more profound and beautiful. He says, so the ultimate destiny is to realize the higher self rather than being propelled by the limited ego. It could be said in ordinary language that one is being pulled along by the future rather than being propelled by the past. So in a sense then, we are on an evolutionary trajectory of coming home to the knowledge of our higher self and union with God. And that seems to be somewhere out in the future. It's not here yet. It's way out there. And what is happening within the spiritual dimension is past, present, and future are occurring simultaneously. So in one timeline of this moment, you're already awake. You're already yourself. It's an always already reality. How can eternity be interrupted by time? So what's happening is our thoughts are intruding and interrupting this always already knowledge. And what Hawkins is saying is, instead of thinking like you're being propelled by your past to seek the self, it's like the self is pulling you, like in a tractor field, to come home. And you know what he says in A Course in Miracles, and this is what we're unconsciously always up to, is he says in the Course that the Spirit is pulling us home, and the ego feels completely threatened by that, because it's going to lose its identity in that ocean of divinity. That's what it feels. Its separate existence won't be real in that higher self. And so there's a reaction compulsion, he says in A Course in Miracles, that we are constantly, moment by moment, feeling this pull. And when it gets too intense or too scary or too threatening to our separated reality, we immediately have a reaction to put up some kind of a block, a belief, an emotion that insulates us, protects us from love. So what makes it doubly insane is that the ego, that part of your mind that says it's you as the separate self, wants love, wants to feel the joy, wants to have peace and safety. And at the same time, you're being pulled to it by God. And if you learned to let go and surrender to the pull, you'd find everything you wanted. You'd find yourself, and you would be and have everything. But the ego is so insane that it wants love. It's driving you to find it, but in all the wrong places, as the song goes. And what is really bringing you to love, the ego feels threatened by, and so it will constantly bring you to a place where it's telling you that's not it. That's why he says again in A Course in Miracles, we have such a upside down, topsy-turvy understanding that love is fear and fear is love. That we're more attracted to fear and guilt and sadness than we are to love. And that's what's the choice going on every moment. That's why we have to jump ship, because the ship's heading in the wrong direction. It will completely take us off course into increasingly deeper and darker fear states unless we jump ship. It is obvious that unless one was destined for enlightenment, one would not even be interested in the subject. So the fact that you want enlightenment, you want to know God, that's your destiny. That's the end game. To even aspire to such a state is actually quite rare. In an entire lifetime, the average person does not meet even one other person who is primarily interested in reaching enlightenment. The path can be arduous and demanding. In the Western world, there is really no accepted or traditional role for the spiritual seeker. It is not expected that one will finish up one's worldly business and then at retirement spend the rest of life spiritually seeking the truth to the exclusion of all else, right? So we talked about the Hindu caste system, right? You have, the priestly caste, the warrior administrators, the merchants, and the labor force. Well, there's another demarcation within Hindu society. You start out as the student of spiritual truth, and at an early age, you're taken under the tutelage of a guru. You're a brahmachari, and you're learning all the sacred teachings. And then when you reach like 17, you're married, and you live a householder life, grahastya. And then at some point, you have your kids, you've contributed to the world, you've built your house, and now you pass your house on to posterity, your children, and you and your wife go into the forest and you begin to do deep spiritual work. That's the fourth stage, the third stage. And then the fourth stage is you're finally ready to experience the deepening of your higher self, this true awakening, and that's sannyas. You renounce the world. And this has been a pattern within Hindu culture for thousands of years, that earning money and contributing to society is one stage that you will outgrow because it's not the meaning and goal of life. It is part of life, but it's not the end-all and be-all. In our Western world, this is what happens. We have left out those other parts. Well, we've left out the early stage of learning the truth, getting these sacred impressions within the young and malleable mind. We've gone right into the idea of earning money and getting stuff and having the most toys. And then we want to retire and play golf and, go into all of these trivial ideas and stay in that low level of consciousness. And so he's saying here that in our society, this idea of being a spiritual seeker and waking up isn't even on the radar for the normal operations of our world, our Western world. So in the West, a serious spiritual student most often joins dedicated, like-minded persons who are often viewed somewhat suspiciously as dropouts from society, unless they enter a monastery or a theological seminary. Okay, so let's get into a little quiet reflection. So if you will, you can just sit nice and tall in your seat, relax, close your eyes. Find that slow, rhythmical breath. Keep letting go of your past, any thoughts that deny the divinity of God's presence in the here and the now. Simply open your mind and be willing to be shown what is real, who you are. Slow, deep breath. As you open your heart to the present moment and to divine presence, take these words from the Mother into your heart as seeds of new life and new possibility. Here's the Mother's prayer. Lord, you of whom I would be constantly conscious, and whom I would realize in the smallest cells of my being, you whom I would know as myself and see manifested in all things, you who are the sole reality, the only real cause and aim of existence. Grant that my love for you may grow ever greater, so that I may be all love, your love, and that being your love, I may unite completely with you. May this love grow more and more intense, complete, luminous, powerful. May this love become an irresistible urge towards you, the invincible means of manifesting you. May everything in this being become pure, profound, disinterested, divine love. May this weakened being take advantage of its weakness and be reconstituted by your love. May the brain be reconstituted by your love. May I feel your sublime and calm love from every pore. May your love overflow, flood, penetrate, transfigure, regenerate, animate all things with the power, the splendor, the sweetness, and force which are its very own. And your love is peace. In your love is joy. In your love is the perfection of all things. Your love is vaster than the universe and more lasting than all the ages. It is infinite, eternal. It is yourself. And it is yourself I want to be, and that I am. For such is your law, such is your will. You can stay in that quiet meditative state as the blue bag goes around. If you're joining us online in Facebook land or YouTube, please click the link below and contribute to the 8 a.m. service. The Unity Church asks, rather than not ask, but thanks you for your support. and blessing the offering. We charge this with the intention that it take a form that brings to mind God's love and divine presence, pulling us into our true nature. And so it is. Amen. All right, my friends, we could rise and seal the deal. Keeping this love aflame within the heart as we say the unity prayer. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. And the presence of God watches over us wherever we are. God is. Amen. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a beautiful day.